My name is Marilyn Ross. I'm 41 years old, a public school teacher in Vermont. I've never married, never had kids. Some people call me independent. Others say I'm too quiet. I just know that I've spent most of my adult life working hard, keeping to myself, and trying not to be a burden. I don't own much. But after 20 years of teaching, tutoring, and saving every penny, I finally bought something I could call mine. A little red brick house on the edge of a quiet town where the forest meets the back porch and the light hits the windows just right around 5:30 p.m. I called it Cedar House. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. It was mine, and that was enough. After 6 months of scrubbing, repainting, replacing cabinets, and filling every corner with soft light and familiar scents, I decided to invite my family over for dinner, a quiet celebration of this new chapter. I wanted them to see that I had done it on my own, that I was okay, that I didn't need rescuing. I woke up at 5 that morning, cleaned every window, ironed the linen napkins, lit a candle that smelled like orange peel and cedar. I cooked my mother's favorite, beef stew with red wine, and baked spiced pear tartlets from scratch. I even arranged the table so my brother could sit in the seat he liked, facing the wall and not the door, just how Dad used to. At 6 p.m. sharp, Brett, my older brother, showed up. He knocked, but only out of habit. He walked in with that same slightly amused look he always had, like he was inspecting a project he had no intention of approving. "Brick? Real brick?" he asked, tapping the fireplace with his knuckle. "Yes," I said. "I picked it myself." Next came Tasha, his wife. She didn't take off her shoes. Her heels tracked tiny bits of dirt across the rug I'd just had cleaned. She didn't look around, just set her bag down and started texting. "It smells nice," she said, but her eyes never left her phone. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or just something to say. Last was my mother, Helen. She didn't hug me. She never really was that kind of mom. She walked in, slowly surveying the living room. She ran her fingers across the windowsill where I'd placed a small vase of jasmine. She murmured, not quite approval, not quite disapproval, just a sound. We sat. I'd made name cards, written each by hand, tied a sprig of lavender to each one with twine. They didn't comment. Over dinner, I tried to keep conversation light, asked about Brett's business, Tasha's yoga classes. I shared stories from school, funny things my second graders said. They nodded, smiled politely. Not once did anyone ask me how I felt, whether I was happy, whether I was proud. They just ate. I brought out dessert. My mother put down her fork and took a breath. And Brett spoke. "Marilyn, you've done great here," he said. "Really. But this house, it's too much for one person. Too big, too isolated. You shouldn't be alone out here." I blinked. "What are you saying?" "We've been talking," he continued, "and we think it's better if the house isn't just under your name. You've never been great with finances, and well, Mom and I want to make sure everything stays safe." My mother nodded, folding her napkin carefully. "It's not that we don't trust you," she said softly, "but you've always struggled to manage things on your own." I looked back and forth between them. Tasha pulled something from her bag, a manila envelope. "These are just preliminary documents," she said. "You can look them over later, but it's better if the house becomes a shared family asset. That way we can help." Help. As if I'd asked for help. As if I'd built this place to be handed over the moment it felt too big. I stood up slowly. "This house is mine," I said. "I bought it. I signed the mortgage. I paid every bill." Brett shrugged. "Technically, for now, but that can change." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just picked up the dessert plates, even though no one had touched them, and walked to the kitchen. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them take my life apart. Not quietly, not politely, and definitely not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to, curled up on the couch in a friend's guest room across town, but my mind kept replaying the dinner, over and over, every look, every word, every breath. The next morning, I drove back to the house. I told myself I just needed to grab a few things, some documents for work, my winter coat, a pair of boots. I still believed, somehow, that this was all just a misunderstanding, that maybe they'd come to their senses. I pulled into the driveway. The lock had been changed. There was a yellow sticky note on the door. It read, "For safety reasons, please contact Brett before entering. Your family. My family." I stood there, stunned. No text, no call, no warning, just a note. On my door. The house I bought, the house I paid for, maintained, cleaned, and filled with my own quiet dreams. I tried calling Brett. He didn't answer. Neither did my mother. Tasha blocked me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt erased. I went to work the next day as if nothing had happened. I smiled at the front office staff, taught spelling and subtraction like usual, laughed with my students. On the outside, I was the same Miss Ross everyone knew. Inside, I was unraveling. That evening, I got a call from the bank. A woman named Monica left a voicemail. "Hi, Miss Ross. We received a request to add Brett and Helen Ross as co-signers on your mortgage file. Just need your confirmation before we process anything." I played the message 3 times. My heart pounded. My hands shook. They were trying to make it legal. They weren't just changing the locks. They were changing the records. I didn't sleep that night. I tried to, curled up on the couch in a friend's guest room across town, but my mind kept replaying the dinner, over and over. Every look, every word, every breath. The next morning, I drove back to the house. I told myself I just needed to grab a few things, some documents for work, my winter coat, a pair of boots. I still believed, somehow, that this was all just a misunderstanding, that maybe they'd come to their senses. I pulled into the driveway. The lock had been changed. There was a yellow sticky note on the door. It read, "For safety reasons, please contact Brett before entering. Your family. My family." I stood there, stunned. No text, no call, no warning, just a note on my door. The house I bought, the house I paid for, maintained, cleaned, and filled with my own quiet dreams. I tried calling Brett. He didn't answer. Neither did my mother. Tasha blocked me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt erased. I went to work the next day as if nothing had happened. I smiled at the front office staff, taught spelling and subtraction like usual, laughed with my students. On the outside, I was the same Miss Ross everyone knew. Inside, I was unraveling. That evening, I got a call from the bank. A woman named Monica left a voicemail. "Hi, Ms. Ross. We received a request to add Brett and Helen Ross as co-signers on your mortgage file. Just need your confirmation before we process anything." I played the message 3 times. My heart pounded. My hands shook. They were trying to make it legal. They weren't just changing the locks. They were changing the records. They were trying to turn my home into our home. I drove to a local coffee shop and sat in the farthest corner. I opened my laptop and logged into every account: mortgage, utilities, insurance. Someone had already changed the mailing address to my mother's P.O. box. There were emails from the power company and water service confirming the switch. The worst part? I hadn't seen any of them until now. They were quietly forwarded, hidden. I scrolled through old emails and found one I'd overlooked a few weeks ago. The subject line read, "Secondary owner address verification, Cedar Trail property." At the time, I thought it was junk. Now I realized it was a red flag, and I'd missed it. I sat back in the chair, my throat tight. I didn't cry, I just disconnected. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like ice. You go numb. That night, I called Cassidy Green, a college friend of mine who now worked as a real estate attorney. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered how sharp she was. She used to say things like, "Don't mistake silence for surrender," and "Some of us fight with facts, not fists." I needed someone like that now. She picked up after 2 rings. "Marilyn?" she said. "Wow, long time." And then I told her everything, calmly, fact by fact, like I was giving a report. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "You need to come in, immediately. This is more serious than you think." The next morning, I met her at her office downtown. She wore glasses now and her hair was shorter, but her voice was the same. Calm, cool, razor sharp. She flipped through my documents, nodding slowly. "This," she said, tapping one of the forged address change notices, "is fraud." She looked up. They can dress it up as concern or family protection all they want, but what they're doing is illegal. You have full legal ownership. No one, not even a parent, can take that from you without consent. I nodded, but part of me still wanted to ask, why would they do this? Cassidy seemed to read my mind. "They're counting on you not fighting," she said, "because you're quiet, because you're kind, because you were raised to believe that family always means well." She slid a folder across the desk. Let's remind them, kindness is not weakness. And that's when it changed. That's when I stopped hoping for an apology and started preparing for a response. By the end of that meeting with Cassidy, I had a plan, or at least a place to start. Documentation is your defense, she'd said. Paper trails don't lie, people do. So I went back to the basics. I sat at the tiny kitchen table in my temporary rental and pulled out my laptop, a notepad, and a portable scanner. And I started collecting everything: mortgage agreements, tax documents, bank statements, utility bills, email exchanges, anything with my name on it. It felt strange, having to prove that I owned something I already knew was mine. But that's the thing about manipulation. It makes you doubt the obvious. And the more I looked, the more I found. First, I checked the smart home app connected to my security system. I'd installed cameras when I first bought Cedar House, not because I was paranoid, but because I lived alone, and it gave me peace of mind. I hadn't looked at the footage in weeks. When I logged in, the system showed recent activity, all while I was away. There, on the screen, was Tasha, unlocking the front door and walking in like she owned the place. Another clip, Brett and my mother, standing in the living room, flipping through folders on my desk. Brett said something, and the camera caught it clearly. Just change the address now. She won't even notice. She never checks this stuff. My mother didn't object. She nodded, quiet, compliant. It was all so casual, like discussing groceries or redecorating. I paused the video, rewound, played it again. My hands weren't shaking. My eyes weren't even teary, but my chest felt hollow. They didn't just lie. They planned this. Next, I dug into old voicemail backups. I remembered a strange message I'd gotten months ago from the power company, asking to confirm an account transfer. I'd thought it was a scam at the time and deleted it. Now I realized it was part of their setup. They'd been laying the groundwork long before that dinner. There were other clues I'd missed. A non-text from my mother saying, "Wouldn't it be better if you had someone help manage things?" A non-conversation with Brett last year when he offered to take care of the paperwork during my work trip. A non-parental way Tasha once asked for my spare key just in case. At the time, I told myself, they're trying to help. They're just concerned. Now I saw it clearly. Concern had been a mask. I created a spreadsheet. Cassidy called it my timeline of truth. Every entry had 3 columns: date, event, evidence. It included the day a mortgage purchase, exact date the mailing address was changed, with a screenshot, the bank call and voicemail transcript, security footage, utility account logs. Cassidy reviewed the file via email that night and wrote back, "This is excellent. This isn't just defense. This is a case." Still, there was one thing I hadn't done: return to the house. Not yet. Even though the court hadn't ruled yet, Cassidy had filed an injunction, a temporary legal hold to prevent any further changes to the property. That meant technically they couldn't touch the house anymore. But emotionally, I wasn't ready to walk through that door. Instead, I went for a walk through the old neighborhood, past the post office, the corner bakery, the little antique shop I used to browse on Saturday mornings. I stopped by Mrs. Lydia's house, my neighbor, the sweet widow who lived alone next door to Cedar House. I hadn't seen her since the dinner. She opened the door slowly. "Marilyn?" I nodded. "Hi. I'm sorry I've been gone." She stepped outside and hugged me. No questions, just warmth. "I wondered what happened," she said softly. "Your brother was coming and going a lot. And your mom. One day they were carrying boxes." "Boxes?" I paused. "Do you remember when that was?" She squinted, thoughtful. "A few days after that dinner, maybe a week. They said you were relocating." I felt something cold run down my spine. They were already moving in, already rewriting the narrative. "Would you be willing to say that in writing?" I asked her. She nodded without hesitation. "Of course, honey. What they did, it's wrong. You've worked too hard to have someone else take that from you." I didn't cry, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something break loose. Not pain, not anger, resolve. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in months. They tried to erase me, but every piece of proof I gather, every fact I hold in my hand, is me taking myself back. And I wasn't stopping now. If you asked me what changed after that day with Mrs. Lydia, I wouldn't say I suddenly felt brave. I felt ready. Ready to stop just understanding what they'd done and start doing something about it. The following week, I met Cassidy every other day. Her office became a kind of war room, quiet, focused, full of files and sticky notes and timelines. She printed everything I'd collected: camera footage, screenshots, emails, bank statements, utility account changes, my spreadsheet of dates and events. She laid them out like puzzle pieces, each one connecting to a bigger picture. "This isn't just manipulation," she said. "This is coordinated fraud." Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was legal. Cassidy had been in courtrooms for over a decade. She didn't blink at tears or gasp at betrayal, but she respected evidence, and she said I had plenty. Our first step was filing an injunction, a court order to freeze any further changes to the house. That meant no refinancing, no new owners, no renovations, and no access to the property without my written consent. The moment that injunction was filed, the dynamic shifted. I wasn't just the quiet daughter anymore. I was a legal barrier. Next came the formal petition for fraud and unauthorized access, naming Brett, Tasha, and my mother as responsible parties. Cassidy warned me that including my mother would be emotionally complicated. "You're allowed to feel guilty," she said, "but don't let guilt make you passive again." She was right. For most of my life, I'd tried not to upset anyone. I stayed small. I said, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. I made excuses for people who never gave me the same grace in return. But now, watching my name on legal documents protected by real law, I felt something shift. I wasn't just defending property, I was defending my voice. We prepared affidavits and a formal complaint. Cassidy helped me write a personal statement, not just legal facts, but my story. She told me not to water it down. Judges are people. They respond to truth told clearly. So I wrote, "I spent 2 decades saving for this home. I purchased it with no financial help. I lived alone, paid my bills, and maintained the property. I invited my family to celebrate with me, and instead they took it as an opportunity to seize what I had built. They said it was for my own good, but they never asked what I wanted. They didn't protect me. They erased me." A week later, Cassidy received a letter from Brett's lawyer. It was 2 pages long and dripping with polite condescension. It claimed my family acted in the interest of safety, that I had shown signs of emotional fragility, and that they regretted the misunderstanding. They offered to restructure the ownership to maintain peace. Cassidy laughed as she tossed the letter onto the desk. Translation? They got caught. Now they want to retreat without admitting anything. I asked what we should say in response. Her answer was simple: no. The pretrial hearing was scheduled 2 weeks out. That gave us time to organize all evidence into clear categories: ownership and financial history, unauthorized misrepresentation, latest statements, including Mrs. Lydia's affidavit. It was meticulous work, but in every scanned document, every confirmed date, every notarized statement, I felt myself rebuilding. Piece by piece, I was reassembling the life they tried to steal, not just the house, but the clarity I had about my worth. One afternoon, I sat with Cassidy going over strategy. "What if they lie in court?" I asked. "They probably will," she said. "That's why you brought the truth with you." I drove by Cedar House later that evening, not to go in, but just to see it. The porch light was off. The maple trees had started to change: gold, rust, deep red. Autumn had arrived without permission, just like everything else this year. But something about the way the house stood there, quiet but still standing, made me feel steadier. They had entered, they had rearranged, they had even changed the locks, but they hadn't broken it, and they hadn't broken me. In the final days before court, I slept better than I had in weeks. I wasn't scared of them anymore, because I finally understood. I didn't need them to believe I was strong. I just needed to act like it. And I was. Court was never a place I imagined myself. Not as a teacher, not as someone who avoided conflict at all costs. But on that chilly morning, I walked into the Franklin County Courthouse wearing a simple gray blouse, black slacks, and the calmest expression I could manage. I wasn't here to win a fight. I was here to reclaim what was already mine. The courtroom was small, no jury, just a judge, 2 attorneys, and the people I once called family sitting across from me. Brett, in a suit a bit too polished for the occasion, Tasha, clutching a designer bag like it was her armor, and my mother Helen, with folded hands and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. They looked calm, practiced. I knew better. Cassidy sat beside me. Her presence was grounding, all logic, no drama. She'd prepared me for everything, the questions, the tone, the games, but nothing could have prepared me for the quiet ache in my chest when I saw my mother sitting on the side of the people trying to take my life apart. The hearing began. The judge, Honorable Marla Ramirez, asked both parties to present a summary. Cassidy stood first. Her voice was crisp and composed. Your Honor, we are here to protect legal property rights and expose a coordinated effort to manipulate ownership through forged documentation, unauthorized access, and coercive behavior disguised as familial concern. What happened to my client wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, backed by deliberate action. She submitted our evidence: mortgage documents solely in my name, utility and address changes without my approval, footage from my home security system, emails, voicemails, and the timeline I had carefully built, a written witness statement from Mrs. Lydia. Then came Brett's attorney. His voice was softer, warmer, strategic. Your Honor, this is not about theft. It's about families stepping in when someone may be overwhelmed. The Ross family acted out of concern. There was never malicious intent. He used words like emotional instability and protective oversight. He called their actions proactive care. They weren't here to admit fault. They were here to rewrite the story. Cassidy called me to testify. My heart thumped against my ribs as I stood, but my voice somehow stayed steady. I told the court how I bought the home after 20 years of working, how I invited my family over for a dinner to celebrate, how days later I returned to find the locks changed, how they had tried to quietly alter ownership records behind my back. I never asked for help, I said. They assumed I couldn't manage, not because I'd failed, but because I lived differently than they did. They treated my independence like it was a liability. But that house, I built that dream alone, and I won't let anyone take it from me in the name of concern. The courtroom was still. The judge scribbled notes but never looked away. Then it was their turn. Brett went first. He spoke with ease, painting himself as the responsible older brother who saw warning signs. He claimed I was showing isolation tendencies and poor decision-making, citing things like my spending on custom tile and non-essentials. He said I had no family of my own, that someone had to step in. Tasha nodded solemnly beside him. Then my mother spoke. Her voice was quiet, tired. I just didn't want her to be alone in that house, she said. She's always been sensitive. I thought we were helping. She didn't cry, but she didn't deny anything either, and somehow that hurt more. Cassidy's rebuttal was swift. Help, she said, requires consent. Marilyn never gave that. Her independence is not evidence of incapacity. Her boundaries are not evidence of instability. This isn't about family dynamics. This is about ownership, agency, and the law. The judge paused. She looked at me. Ms. Ross, she asked, what outcome are you hoping for? I didn't hesitate. I want the house returned to my full control. I want the records corrected, and I want peace, without having to defend my ability to live on my own. 2 days later, the ruling came. Full ownership reinstated. All attempted transfers declared void. Restraining order filed to prevent further interference. Brett and Tasha's actions referred for further legal review. When I stepped out of the courthouse, Cassidy turned to me. You didn't just get your house back, she said. You got your life back. She was right, and no one would take it again, not quietly and not ever. I returned to Cedar House 3 days after the ruling. I took my time driving. No rush, no fear, no one waiting to meet me at the door. That used to make me feel lonely. Now it made me feel free. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Same red bricks, same sloping roof, same porch light I'd installed the day I moved in. But as I stepped out of my car, keys in hand, I realized I didn't feel like I was coming back. I felt like I was coming home. The new locks clicked open easily, the kind of sound you don't notice until you've heard a lock refuse you. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Furniture had been moved. The sofa turned toward the window, my books rearranged on unfamiliar shelves, a different rug under the coffee table. Everything was technically still there, but slightly off, like someone else had tried to live in the life I'd built, and failed. I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I just rolled up my sleeves and started putting things back where they belonged. I moved the armchair beneath the lamp I loved, the one with the warm gold glow that made evenings feel soft. I took down the minimalist artwork Tasha had hung in the hallway and put up my framed prints of birds, the ones my second graders had drawn me over the years. I threw open the windows and let the autumn air in. Cedar and dry leaves and the faintest hint of firewood. Home. I spent the next few days quietly reclaiming my space. I made tea in the old blue kettle. I restocked my pantry. I scrubbed the countertops, not because they were dirty, but because I wanted to touch every inch again. Every towel refolded, every dish returned to its shelf, every choice mine. Neighbors waved as I walked to the market. A few asked how I'd been. I smiled and said, "Better now." No one pressed for more, and I didn't owe them anything more. Mrs. Lydia brought over a plate of cookies. "Crispy edges," she said, "just how you like them." She didn't ask about Brett or my mother. She didn't mention the court case. Instead, she looked around and said, "It feels like your house again." And it did, not because the furniture was in the right place, but because I no longer needed anyone to agree with me that I belonged here. I didn't call my family. I didn't text. I didn't post online. I didn't need them to understand what they'd done. I no longer needed their apology, their approval, or their permission. Forgiveness might come one day, but it wouldn't be for them. It would be for me when I no longer needed to carry what they never took responsibility for. One evening, I stood at the kitchen counter peeling pears for a tart. I hadn't baked since the night of that dinner, but tonight I wanted to. I added cinnamon, nutmeg, a bit of brown sugar. The scent filled the house as it baked. I curled up in my armchair with a blanket, a slice of tart, and a book I hadn't finished since last spring. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. No locks would be changed, no papers forged. No one would tell me I couldn't live here, or live alone, or live quietly. This wasn't just a house I'd won back. It was a version of myself I'd come back to, one who no longer had to shrink to make others feel comfortable, one who didn't need to prove her life had value, one who understood, finally, that peace isn't passive. Sometimes it's fought for, in courtrooms, in silence, in every decision to keep going. It's strange how silence changes after a storm. In the beginning, the silence at Cedar House had felt heavy, like absence, like rejection. Now it felt clean, open, sacred. I still woke early, made my tea, sat by the window, but the way I filled my day had changed. It wasn't about proving I was okay. It was about finally being okay, even without anyone watching. I started small. I replanted the flower boxes out front. Lavender, marigolds, and thyme, all hardy enough to survive the changing weather. I rejoined the local library, signed up to volunteer for weekend readings. I saw familiar faces, former students, parents, teachers, all people who had quietly respected me while I'd spent years trying to earn approval from people who never gave it. I didn't need to explain what had happened. I just needed to show up, for myself this time. People often talk about forgiveness like it's a bridge, something you build to cross back to the people who hurt you. But I think sometimes forgiveness is a door you close, softly, without slamming, and without locking, because you're choosing to live in a different room now. I didn't hear from Brett. Tasha tried to email once, a half apology buried in excuses. I didn't reply. My mother sent a birthday card a month late. Inside it was blank except for "Take care." I placed it in a drawer and didn't read it again. One day, while dusting the bookshelf, I found the letter I'd written but never sent, the one from my mother, where I'd poured out every hurt, every disappointment, every hope she never met. I read it one more time. Then I walked it out to the fire pit in the backyard. I lit it, watched the corners curl and the words disappear into smoke. Not to erase what had happened, but to remind myself that I didn't need that letter anymore. I had already said everything I needed, by living, by choosing, by staying. I began building a new kind of family, not through blood, but through choice. Cassidy and I started meeting up outside of court documents. We went for walks, cooked dinner, laughed like we used to in college. She said I reminded her of who she used to be, and I told her she reminded me of who I was becoming. Mrs. Lydia joined us sometimes. We called her our village elder, and she wore the title proudly. She brought cookies and stories and a quiet kind of wisdom that never felt like judgment. That Christmas, I hosted dinner, just a few people, Cassidy, Lydia, 2 neighbors, and one of my former students who had no family nearby. We ate roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and yes, the same pear tart I had baked that night so long ago. Only this time, every plate was clean, every chair was filled, and no one tried to take anything but seconds. When they left, I stood in the doorway of Cedar House, snow falling gently outside, light glowing from every window, and I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, "You are safe now. You are home." People think survival is loud, that it looks like confrontation, resistance, shouting. But sometimes survival is quiet. It's not yelling when you could. It's not begging when they expect you to. It's choosing peace when chaos is handed to you with a smile. And it's standing your ground, not to prove anything, but because you finally realized you belong where you are. I still live in Cedar House. I still drink tea by the window. And every time I look around, I don't just see furniture and bricks and wood. I see a life no one gave me and no one can take. Marilyn didn't just win back her house. She reclaimed her voice, her boundaries, and the quiet strength that had always been hers. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was about standing tall without shouting, walking away without bitterness, and choosing peace over approval. If you've ever felt silenced by the people who should have protected you, know this: your truth matters. You don't have to fight loud to fight back. Sometimes simply staying is victory enough. You don't have to fight loudly to win. Sometimes simply standing your ground is enough. Thank you for watching Marilyn's story. If you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, know this: you are not alone, and you deserve to live on your own terms. Like, subscribe, and share to support more true stories of quiet strength, healing, and truth.